Today, I'm going to tell you a story that won't leave anyone untouched. This isn't just a tale about war and coming home, it's the journey of a man who went through fear, pain, and trials to understand the value of every single moment of life. You'll hear how soldiers rejoiced at the news of returning home, yet along with joy, they felt the bitterness of parting with friends who remained on the front lines. You'll discover what it means to live between battles, to share the last piece of bread, to laugh around a fire when chaos surrounds you. This is a story of heroism, not loud or celebrated, but quiet, everyday courage. About how a single step can save a platoon, how one family photograph can become a light in the darkness. I want you to watch this video all the way to the end. Because inside, it lies the truth. The truth about war, about coming home, about memory that must never be forgotten. And if you stay with me until the very last words, you'll feel that this story touches each of us. It's about why we live, why we hold on, and why we return home. Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button so the memory lives on and so we can share even more of the truth that must never be forgotten. I was born in a small town where life moved quietly and steadily. The streets were short, the houses low, and people knew each other by name and by habit. In the evenings, neighbors sat on their porches, talking about the weather and the latest news, while children played ball until the streetlights came on. Everything felt predictable, as if time here moved slower than in the rest of the world. But inside me lived a thirst for change. I often looked at the road disappearing beyond the hills and wondered, what lies out there, beyond our town? The world seemed enormous, and my life too small. I dreamed of traveling, of seeing the ocean, hearing the noise of big cities, and feeling like part of something greater. When the time came to choose, I signed a contract with the Army. The decision wasn't easy, but it felt like the only way to break free from the familiar circle and prove to myself that I was capable of more. Deep down, I understood. The Army was not only a chance to see the world, but also a trial that would change me forever. The day of departure was clear and cold. At the station, the air smelled of iron and coal. People hurried about their business, and I stood with my backpack, feeling my heart beating faster than usual. My mother held my hand tightly, as if afraid to let go forever. Her fingers trembled, but her voice remained firm. "Write to us, son. Just don't stay silent." My father stood nearby, silent. He didn't like long speeches, but his gaze said more than any words. In it were pride, worry, and that special silent blessing you can only understand with your heart. I promised to write letters. I promised they would know I was alive, no matter what happened. At that moment, I didn't yet realize how hard it would be to keep that promise, how difficult it would be to find words when war roared all around. But then it seemed to me that a letter was a simple thing, a bridge between me and home. The train moved, the screech of wheels, the rumble of iron, and the town was left behind. I watched out the window until the familiar streets dissolved into the haze. My chest felt empty and heavy. But along with that came a strange sense of freedom. I was riding toward the unknown, and it was now becoming my destiny. On the road, I thought about the future. What would I be like in a year? Would I return home the same as I left? These questions haunted me, but I tried to push them away. Youth gave me confidence. Everything would be fine. I was strong. I would endure. On the seat next to me, a boy my age held a letter in his hands. He read it over and over, as if trying to memorize every word. I realized that each of us had our own reason to be here. Some sought money, some recognition, some simply saw no other path. But we were united by one thing: we were leaving behind our familiar lives and stepping into the unknown. When the train stopped at an intermediate station, I stepped onto the platform and breathed in the cold air. It smelled of freedom and anxiety at the same time. I felt that ahead of me awaited not just service, but a whole new life, full of trials and discoveries. And yet, despite the fear, inside me burned a spark of hope. I believed that letters would be my salvation, that every word written on paper would bring me back home, to those who waited. I didn't yet know that sometimes writing would be harder than going into battle. But then, on that first day, I was sure. The connection with home was what would help me endure. The train moved again, and I returned to my seat. Fields, villages, and scattered forests flashed outside the window. I looked at them and thought, goodbye, my town. I will return different. Inside the carriage it was stuffy, smelling of iron and old wood. The wheels beat steadily against the rails, creating a rhythm like the beating of a heart. I sat by the window, watching the fields and villages flicker past. All of it already felt foreign, as if I was tearing away from my old life and stepping into a new, unknown one. Next to me sat a boy my age. He held a folded sheet of paper and read it again and again. I noticed his lips moving, as if he repeated each word to himself, trying to memorize it. It was a letter from his girlfriend. I understood by the way he carefully folded it back into the envelope, as if it were the most precious thing in his life. "Heading to training too?" he asked, noticing my glance. "Yeah," I answered briefly. We exchanged a few words, but the conversation quickly faded. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts. I pulled out a small notebook from my backpack and wrote a few lines. "Mom? Dad? I'm on my way." The train roars, and my heart beats as if it wants to break free. I promised to write, and here is my first letter. I don't know what lies ahead, but I'm holding on. The carriage was full of boys like us. Young men with backpacks, some nervously fiddling with their belts, some trying to sleep under their jackets. Their faces showed a mix of fear and curiosity. We all understood that we were heading toward a trial that would change us forever. At one station, an older man with a soldier's bearing entered the carriage. He sat across from us, and for a while, silently watched. Then he said, "I once traveled this road too. Remember, the hardest part is not training and not war. The hardest part is to keep yourself." His words hung in the air, and I felt them settle inside me like a heavy stone. I wondered, what does it mean to keep yourself? Not to lose your humanity? Not to forget who you are? The train rushed on. Outside, twilight thickened, and the lights of villages looked like distant stars. I imagined my mother lighting a lamp in the kitchen, my father sitting in his chair, and them thinking of me. That thought warmed me, and I picked up my notebook again. "I'm riding into the night," I wrote, "and I feel the road carrying me farther and farther. But your faces are with me. I promise to write, and I will write. Let my words be the bridge between us." Inside the train there was silence, broken only by the rhythm of the wheels. Someone hummed a tune softly. Someone prayed. Someone just stared into the darkness. We were different, but in that moment the same. Soldiers on the way to a new life. The morning began with the trembling of wheels and the cold light breaking through the foggy train windows. The train slowly approached the station where we were to be met. Outside stretched gray fields, sparse trees, and empty roads. It seemed as though the land itself was preparing for something harsh, just as we were. I woke earlier than the others. The carriage was silent, broken only by the steady rhythm of the rails. A few soldiers still dozed. Someone nervously smoked by the door, and I stared out the window, trying to guess what awaited us ahead. In my chest was a strange feeling, a mix of anxiety and curiosity. When the train slowed, everyone came alive. We began gathering our things, tightening the straps of our backpacks, as if preparing for our first exam. The boy with the letter from his girlfriend carefully tucked the envelope into his breast pocket like a talisman. I pulled out my notebook and wrote a short line. We are approaching. It all begins. The station turned out to be small, almost empty. On the platform stood several officers in strict uniforms. Their faces were stern, their movements precise. They looked like stone figures that knew no fatigue. One of them commanded loudly, "Unload." We stepped out of the train and lined up. The cold air struck my face, smelling of dampness and iron. My heart beat faster. Everything around felt foreign, but it was here that our new life began. We were loaded into military trucks. The road to the camp was short, but it felt endless. The wheels rattled on gravel, and we sat in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. I looked at the faces of my comrades. Some tried to hide fear. Some looked determined. But in everyone's eyes was the same thing: expectation. When we entered the camp, a scene of strict order opened before us. Rows of barracks, a parade ground, guard towers. Everything was arranged as if every detail had its place. There was no room for chance here. The officers commanded again, "Quickly, into formation." We lined up on the parade ground. The wind tugged at our jackets, and the officer walked along the row, examining each of us carefully. His voice was sharp like a blow. "From this day you will forget who you were. Here you will become soldiers." Those words sounded like both a sentence and a promise. I felt the past slipping away. Everything that had been my home, the streets of my town, the evening conversations on the porch, now seemed like a distant life. We were led into the barracks. Inside smelled of wood, metal, and something sharp, like disinfectant. Beds stood in neat rows, each with a gray blanket folded precisely. There was no room for the personal. Everything was shared, everything the same. I placed my backpack on the bunk and sat down. In my head, echoed the officer's words, "You will forget who you were." I understood that ahead lay days of training, fatigue, and pain, but along with that a brotherhood that was only beginning to form. I pulled out my notebook again and wrote, "Today I arrived at camp. Everything here is strict, cold, and foreign. But I feel it is here my real story begins." The morning did not begin with sunlight, but with the sharp cry of a sergeant who burst into the barracks like thunder. "Up! Quickly! Time is running!" I jumped from the bunk, not understanding where I was. In my head still echoed the clatter of train wheels. But reality was entirely different. The cold air of the barracks, the smell of metal and sweat, and dozens of boys who, like me, tried to grasp what was happening. The sergeant strode between the rows of beds, his boots pounding loudly on the wooden floor. He didn't speak, he shouted. Every word was an order. Every movement, a test. 30 seconds to dress, he barked. Whoever doesn't make it will run until they drop. I hurriedly pulled on my uniform, fumbling with the sleeves, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. In that moment I realized the world I had known was over. Here there was no place for slowness, doubt, or familiar morning rituals. Here, everything was decided by speed and discipline. We ran out onto the parade ground. The cold morning air struck my face, and for the first time, I felt that the day began not with sunrise, but with a command. The sergeant lined us up in a straight row. His eyes were cold, his voice like steel. "Remember," he said, "you are no longer boys. From this day, you are soldiers, and a soldier lives by the code." And it began. We were forced to run laps around the parade ground. At first it seemed like just a warm-up, but within minutes, our breathing faltered. Our legs grew heavy, and the sergeant kept shouting, "Faster! Do you think the enemy will wait for you to catch your breath?" Sweat ran down my face, My lungs burned with strain. But others ran beside me just as tired, just as frightened. And that gave me strength. After the run, we were taught to stand at attention. It seemed simple to stand still. But when the sergeant walked along the row, nitpicking at every detail, the position of our hands, the angle of our heads, even the expression on our faces, I realized the army demanded perfection in everything. "A soldier has no right to be relaxed," he shouted. "Your body must obey you, just as you obey orders." When we were finally led to the mess hall, I thought only of food. But even here, there was no familiar freedom. We marched in formation, sat down on command, ate quickly, almost silently. The taste was simple, but filling: porridge, bread, a little meat, and all of it felt like part of the system. Food, not for pleasure, but for strength. I noticed many ate greedily, as if afraid there wouldn't be enough time. And indeed, within minutes, the sergeant ordered us to rise again. "In the army, there are no spare minutes," he said. "Every second belongs to service." After breakfast, the lessons began. We were taught to assemble and disassemble weapons. The metal was cold and heavy. The smell of oil clung to our fingers. The sergeant demonstrated the movements quickly and precisely, and we tried to repeat them. Mistakes were not forgiven. For every delay, push-ups. For every inaccuracy, a shout in the face. My fingers trembled. But gradually the movements grew steadier. Inside me grew a strange feeling. The weapon was no longer a foreign object. It was becoming part of me. By midday, I understood the main thing. The army is not just a uniform and a weapon. It is a world where there is no I, only we. Here, every step is subject to the code, every day scheduled to the minute. Brotherhood is the only thing that helps endure. When comrades are beside you, it is easier to bear the cold and exhaustion. By evening, we were wrung out like rags. It felt as though not one day had passed, but a whole week. But the sergeant said, "This is only the beginning. Tomorrow will be harder." I lay on my bunk, feeling pain in every muscle. But inside was another feeling, a strange pride. I had survived the first day. I had not broken. Before sleep, I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "Today, I realized that the army is a world where a man no longer belongs to himself. There is no place for weakness here, but here is born a strength that cannot be found in peaceful life." The first day of training became a boundary for me. Before it, I was a boy from a small town. After it, a soldier, still inexperienced, but already different. The world had changed. Now it consisted of orders, formation, weapons, and pain. But along with that of brotherhood, discipline, and strength, the army showed its reality. It breaks habits, but builds character. It takes away freedom, but gives understanding of the value of every minute. It frightens, but teaches to live where fear is only part of the path. And I understood. Ahead, it would be even harder. But that is the soldier's path. The barracks lived by its own rhythm. The morning began not with the sun, but with the sergeant's shout that burst into the room like a storm. We jumped from our bunks, pulled on our uniforms, lined up on the parade ground, and the cold air cut our faces, reminding us, there is no place for weakness here. Days flowed one after another, alike as drops of water. Running on the parade ground, forced marches along rocky roads, push-ups, until our arms burned. The sergeant shouted as if his voice were part of the code itself. We learned to assemble and disassemble our weapons until our fingers no longer trembled. The metal became familiar, the smell of oil seeped into our skin. Gradually, the rifle stopped being a foreign object, it became an extension of ourselves. In the evenings, the barracks filled with quiet conversations. Some wrote letters home, others lay silently, staring at the ceiling. We shared stories about our families, about girlfriends, about what awaited us ahead. Laughter and jokes helped us forget the fatigue. But behind them always stood a shadow. The thought that all of this was only preparation for something greater. Sometimes the sergeant placed us on guard duty. The night was dark and cold. The barracks slept, and we stood at the gates with rifles, listening to every rustle. In those hours I understood, the army was not only training, but constant readiness. Even in silence, there was unease, as if the camp itself lived in expectation. And yet, behind the strict order of the camp, lay the greater truth, the approach of war. We felt it in the officers' words, in the rare news that reached us, in the way the sergeant looked at us, as if testing. The news came unexpectedly. In the evening, when we returned from training and collapsed onto our bunks, the officer entered the barracks and said briefly, "In a week, you will be sent to the front." Those words hung in the air like a sentence. The barracks froze. No one dared to ask, where exactly, against whom, or for how long. We knew only one thing. In 7 days, our lives would change forever. The emotions were different. Some tried to stay calm, pretending nothing had happened. Some laughed nervously, as if hiding fear behind a joke. But at night, when the lights went out, I heard quiet sobs. Soldiers cried like children, burying their faces in pillows so no one would notice. It wasn't shame, it was truth. We all understood. Ahead lay not training, but real war. I myself couldn't sleep for a long time. Thoughts spun in my head. Will I return home? Will I see my parents again? Will I be able to keep my promise to write letters? I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "Today they told us that in a week we will go to the front. I am afraid, but I must go. I promised to be strong. I be." The day of departure. The week flew by as if it hadn't existed. Each day, we trained harder, but our thoughts were only of the coming journey. And then, the day arrived. At dawn, we were lined up on the parade ground. The platoon stood in a straight row, but our faces betrayed the tension. The sergeant spoke loudly and confidently, but even his voice couldn't hide the unease. We were loaded into trucks. The road was long, and every kilometer felt like a step into the unknown. Fields, villages, and scattered people flashed past the windows. All of it seemed foreign, as if we had already torn ourselves away from peaceful life. Inside the truck there was silence. No one spoke, only rare glances, short, heavy. I pulled out my notebook again. We are on our way. The wheels thunder, and every strike on the road sounds like the ticking of time. I think of home. I think of what lies ahead. The front. When we arrived, we were met by thunder. The ground shook from explosions. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Everything around was chaos, shouting, commands, soldiers running, the roar of artillery. The first clash happened almost immediately. We barely had time to take positions when the attack began. Fire, screams, the earth trembling underfoot. I realized, war is nothing like the movies. There are no heroic poses, no beautiful scenes. There is fear, filth, and moments when life hangs by a thread. I saw comrades fall beside me. Losses became wounds that would never heal. In a letter home I wrote, "Today I saw how fragile life is. Cherish every minute. I am alive, but there is too much death around me." End quote. And at that moment I understood. Everything we had been taught in camp was only preparation. The real war began here, and it knew no mercy. We arrived at the front line early in the morning. The air was thick with smoke, smelling of burning and damp earth. It seemed the ground itself trembled from the roar of artillery. I stood in formation, gripping my rifle, feeling my palms grow wet. Everything we had learned in camp seemed distant and unreal. Here, at the front, every movement was a matter of life and death. The command rang out sharply. To positions, we rushed into the trenches. The earth was cold and wet. Clay clung to our boots. I pressed against the wall, and for the first time heard the whistle of bullets overhead. It was a sound impossible to forget. Thin, slicing the air, and immediately a strike somewhere nearby. My heart dropped. My breath faltered. Inside me, two feelings fought: fear and resolve. Fear screamed, "Run, hide." But resolve answered, "You are a soldier. You must stand." The first explosion thundered so close the ground shook. Clumps of dirt showered down on us. Someone screamed. I raised my head and saw a comrade ahead fall, torn from life in an instant. In that moment I realized, war is nothing like the movies. There are no beautiful scenes, no heroic poses. There is chaos, blood, and moments when the world collapses around you. I lifted my rifle, aiming at enemy silhouettes. My fingers trembled, but I pulled the trigger. The shot deafened me. The recoil struck my shoulder. I didn't know if I hit, but at that moment, it didn't matter. The only thing was to shoot. The only thing was not to freeze in terror. Shouts mixed with the roar. Someone called for a medic, someone gave orders, someone prayed. All of it merged into one terrible chorus of war. I felt the world around me collapsing. The familiar reality disappearing. Only earth, weapons, and fear remained. In my head, thoughts flickered. I promised to write letters. I must survive. I cannot vanish here, among the dirt and smoke. Those words held me, like a thin thread tying me to home. The battle lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like eternity. When it was over, we sat in the trenches, breathing heavily. The earth was torn by explosions, the air thick with gunpowder. I looked at my comrades. Many were alive, but not all. Losses became wounds that would never heal. I pulled out my notebook and wrote with a trembling hand. Today I saw how fragile life is. Cherish every minute. I am alive, but there is too much death around me. And in that moment I knew. War had changed me forever. We lived in expectation between battles. War rarely gave us rest, but those short pauses were the hardest. In battle, everything was simple. There was the enemy, the order, the action. But in the silence between shots came thoughts, fears, and memories. We went out on patrols, long, exhausting marches along shattered roads and empty villages. The earth was scarred by shells. Houses stood abandoned. Windows stared at us like hollow eyes. Sometimes we found traces of life. A forgotten toy, old photographs, pieces of bread left on a table. All of it reminded us, people once lived here, but now only war remained. Rare moments of rest we spent by the fire. Smoke rose into the cold sky. Sparks danced in the dark. We shared stories of home, of loved ones, of dreams. One remembered the smell of his mother's kitchen. Another spoke of a girl who promised to wait. Another dreamed of a future without weapons. Laughter was our weapon against fear. It rang out loudly, sometimes too loudly, as if we wanted to shout down the war itself. I kept a family photograph in my pocket. It was worn, the edges bent, but the faces remained clear. Each time I pulled it out, my heart filled with warmth. It reminded me why I held on. In letters home I wrote, "I miss you. Your faces are my light." The words were simple, but they carried everything I felt. Hardships of the front. The front was merciless not only in battle, but in daily life. We lived in trenches where the earth was damp and cold. Boots soaked through. Clothes were heavy with mud. Sometimes it felt as if the ground itself wanted to swallow us. Food was scarce. We were given rations, tins of stew, hard biscuits, powdered coffee. But often, it wasn't enough. Then we searched for whatever we could find. Sometimes roots, sometimes scraps of bread in ruined houses. Once, we found a sack of potatoes in an abandoned shed. They were rotten, but we peeled them and boiled them in a pot. The taste was strange, but to us it was a feast. There were days when there was no food at all. Then we chewed dry grass just to dull the hunger. On those days I wrote in my notebook, "Today we ate what the wind left behind, but we are alive, and that is what matters." The soldier's heroism. Despite hunger, cold, and fear, each of us showed heroism. Not the kind written about in newspapers. Not loud feats. It was quiet, daily heroism rising at dawn, going on patrol, sharing the last piece of bread with a comrade. I remember one evening. We sat by the fire, and one soldier, John, pulled a small piece of chocolate from his pocket. He had kept it since camp, as a memory of home, but instead of eating it himself, he broke it and shared it among us. Each man got a piece. The taste was sweet, but sweeter still was the feeling of brotherhood. That was heroism, giving your last for others. Another time, during a patrol, we stumbled upon a minefield. One soldier noticed a suspicious glint and stopped us. He went first, checking the road, step by step. His face was calm, though every step could have been his last. Thanks to him, we passed safely. That was heroism, walking forward, knowing you might not return. Inner thoughts. At night, I often couldn't sleep. I lay in the trench, listening to the wind drive dust, and thought, why me? Why us? There was no answer, but I understood. If I broke, others would break too. We held on to each other, like links in a chain. I wrote, "War teaches you to value simple things. A piece of bread, a sip of water, a comrade's laughter. Here, there is no future, only the present. But it is the present that makes us stronger." Between battles, every day looked like the one before. But every day was a trial. We lived in expectation of the next battle, the next order, the next morning. War gave no peace, but in those intervals we learned to remain human. We shared stories. We laughed. We cried. We ate what we found and thanked fate for every bite. We showed heroism in small things, supporting a comrade, sharing the last ration, moving forward despite fear. And I realized, war is not only the battles. War is the life between them. And it is there that true heroism is born. The news came unexpectedly. In the evening, as we sat by the fire sharing the last of our hardtack, the officer approached and said briefly, "Tomorrow, some of you will be going home." At first, we didn't believe it. The words sounded like a dream, like a promise we had waited for too long. Joy flared instantly. Someone jumped up, someone laughed, someone simply covered his face with his hands to hide the tears. We embraced each other, saying, "We survived. We're going home." But joy quickly turned into a heavy feeling. We understood. Going home meant separation. Those who left would leave their friends at the front. We rejoiced for ourselves, but our hearts tightened at the thought of leaving those with whom we had shared bread, fear, and hope. That night no one slept. Some cried quietly, like children, burying their faces in their coats. Some sat silently, staring into the fire. We spoke little, but everyone thought the same. How do you live without those who remain? The day of departure. The morning was cold. We lined up on the parade ground, and the officer read out the names. Mine was among those returning. My heart trembled. Joy and pain mixed together. I looked at the comrades who stayed. Their faces were calm, but their eyes spoke more than words. We embraced tightly, like brothers. One said, "Live for us. Tell our story. Don't forget." Those words became a vow. I understood. Returning home was not the end of war. It was the beginning of another battle. The battle with memory. We boarded the trucks. The road was long, and every kilometer felt like a step into a new world. Fields, villages, peaceful life passed by the windows. All of it seemed foreign. We were silent. The joy of return mixed with the bitterness of parting. Home. When the train stopped at the station, I stepped onto the platform. The air was different, clean, peaceful, filled with the smell of bread and smoke from chimneys. People hurried about their business, smiling, talking, and all of it felt foreign. My mother met me first. Her eyes filled with tears. Her hands trembled as she embraced me. My father stood nearby, silent, but in his gaze was everything. Joy, pride, worry. I smiled, but inside I felt emptiness. I was home, but part of me remained there in the trenches, among smoke and cries. The first days at home greeted me with warmth. Familiar walls, the smell of the kitchen, a soft bed, but I couldn't relax. At night I woke from nightmares, hearing explosions, seeing the faces of fallen comrades. My heart pounded, as if I were back at the front. By day I tried to live an ordinary life. I walked through town, met with friends. They asked, "What was it like?" I answered briefly, "Hard." I couldn't tell them the truth. How do you explain what cannot be understood without living through it yourself? The heavy burden of memory. Every day I carried a heavy burden. Memories came suddenly. The smell of gunpowder, the cries of the wounded, the faces of those who never returned. I saw them before me, heard their voices. They were always with me. Sometimes I sat at the table and suddenly the spoon slipped from my hand because I remembered holding a rifle. Sometimes I walked down the street and flinched at a loud sound because it reminded me of an explosion. People looked at me with surprise, but I couldn't explain that inside me the war was still going on. Letters. I continued writing letters. But now, they were not to home, but to myself. I wrote so I wouldn't forget, so I could preserve the memory of those who stayed behind. Today I saw their faces again. They look at me, silent. I am alive, and they are not. Why me? Why them? These letters were my way of speaking to the past. I knew no one would read them, but they helped me keep my sanity. Conclusion. Returning home was not joy, but a trial. I was among my loved ones, but part of me remained at the front. I carried within me a heavy burden of memories that could never be cast off. But along with it, I understood the value of peace. The value of every minute. I wrote in my notebook, "I am alive. I am home. But the war will always be with me. I will remember. I will keep the memory of those who did not return. That is my duty. That is my life." I sit at the table, and before me lies the notebook, the very one that accompanied me at the front. Its pages are filled with a trembling hand, steeped in the smell of smoke and earth. In these lines are my life, my fears, my hopes. In them are the voices of friends who are no longer here, and the light of faces I keep in memory. I have returned home, but the war remains within me. It lives in the nightmares of the night, in sounds that recall explosions, in every glance at the photograph of my family. Yet I have come to understand, memory is not a burden, but a duty. I read my letters and see that they are not just words. They are testimony. They are the truth of war, which must never be forgotten. I know that one day my children or grandchildren will open this notebook and read the lines. Today I saw how fragile life is. Cherish every minute. And they will understand that war is not heroic scenes from a movie. but a life broken and pieced together again. I keep the memory of those who remained there, of those who shared bread, laughter, and fear with me, of those who shielded a comrade with their body, who shared the last piece of chocolate, who walked first across a minefield. Their heroism was quiet, but eternal. Now my mission is to tell their story. Let my letters become a book. Let them be a bridge between past and future. Let people know the price of peace. I close the notebook and look out the window. Beyond it lies a peaceful street, children playing, people hurrying about their lives. And I think, this is victory. This is the meaning. War changed me forever, but it gave me understanding. The value of every minute lies in peace, in laughter, in simple things. I live for those who did not return. I write for those who must remember. One, and as long as my letters exist, they will speak for us. This story is a reminder of the cost of peace and the strength of memory. Let our voices carry on, so that no one forgets. Subscribe to the channel and support this video with a like. Together, we will preserve the truth and pass it on to future generations. Thank you for staying with me until the end.